My husband had been gone almost a year when his mother whispered, "I'm glad the money helped." I froze. What money? Then she sent me the messages my sister had written using his name. So I printed every one. I thought I misunderstood her. Grief does that sometimes. It makes normal conversations feel far away, like people are speaking through glass. I was standing in my kitchen with cold coffee in my hand, trying to sound steady, while Matthew's mother, Carol, carefully talked around something she thought I already knew. She said, "I know you didn't want us to mention it, honey. Your father-in-law and I are just glad we could help." My chest tightened. I asked, help with what? The silence after that was the first real warning. Matthew had been dead for 11 months. He died suddenly from a heart problem nobody knew about. One day he was teasing me because I couldn't reach the smoke detector, and 2 days later I was sitting in a funeral home signing papers with a pen that barely worked. We had been married 6 years. We didn't have children, and I learned quickly that some people treat childless widows like their grief should be easier to pack away. Like because there were no kids asking where their dad went, I could box up his clothes, cancel his phone plan, and become normal again. But the house didn't reset. His shoes were still by the back door. His hoodie stayed on the chair in our room. His half-used bottle of hot sauce sat in the fridge for months, because throwing it away felt like admitting he wasn't coming back to finish it. Carol and George, Matthew's parents, stayed close after the funeral. They were careful with me. Carol called every Sunday afternoon and always asked if I had eaten. George didn't talk much, but he showed up when something needed fixing. A porch rail. A cabinet hinge. The garage light Matthew had kept meaning to replace. He would knock once, lift his toolbox, and say, "Thought I'd take a look." I think fixing things was the only way he knew how to survive losing a son. My own family didn't know what to do with me. My mom, Nancy, meant well, but she kept saying things like, "You're still young," which made me want to disappear. My dad, Robert, focused on paperwork because emotions made him uncomfortable. He asked about accounts, insurance, bills, and the mortgage. I knew he cared, but it didn't always feel like care. My older sister, Heather, was different at first. She showed up. She brought food. She answered texts when I couldn't. She sat beside me on the bedroom floor while I stared at Matthew's side of the closet. She called the funeral home when I forgot what time I was supposed to be there. She told people I needed space when I didn't have the strength to say it myself. One afternoon, I woke up from a nap and found her washing dishes in my kitchen. I told her she didn't have to keep doing all that. She turned off the faucet and looked almost offended. "You're my sister," she said. "Of course I do." I cried because I believed her. For months, I thought Heather was holding me together. She helped sort mail, picked up groceries, and explained things to people when I couldn't handle another conversation. She even helped with some of Matthew's paperwork. Back then, everything felt impossible. Canceling a subscription in his name could ruin my whole day. That trust is what makes the rest of this feel so sick. The first odd comment came from Carol about 4 months after the funeral. She said she hoped I wasn't worrying about the extra help. I thought she meant the groceries she and George had sent once when I admitted I hadn't eaten anything but toast for 2 days. I got embarrassed and told her she didn't have to do things like that. She went quiet, then said, "We just love you." I didn't push it. I was too tired to inspect every sentence for hidden meaning. Months later, George mentioned it while fixing the back door. He was tightening a screw, not looking at me, when he said, "I hope that money helped with the gap." I almost dropped the mug I was holding. "What gap?" His hand froze on the screwdriver. For a second, he looked like he wanted to unsay it. He said, "Heather told us there were bills." "What bills?" George set the screwdriver down. He looked toward the hallway, like Carol might appear and save him from the conversation. "Medical bills. Funeral costs. The house. She said you were too proud to ask." My whole body went cold. There were no medical bills like that. Matthew died before there was time for anything long and expensive. There was one ambulance bill, and I had already paid it. His life insurance through work had covered the funeral and bought me time to keep the house while I figured out how to live without him. I told George that. His face changed slowly, like the truth was sinking in 1 inch at a time. He said, "You didn't know?" After he left, I called Carol. I tried to stay calm, but my voice didn't sound like mine. I asked her to send me anything Heather had said. Messages, emails, whatever she had. Carol started crying before she answered. She told me she thought she was protecting me. Heather had said I was ashamed. According to Heather, I was falling apart, behind on payments, and terrified of losing the house. She claimed I had begged her not to tell Matthew's parents because I didn't want them to feel responsible after already losing their son. Then Carol forwarded everything. I sat at my kitchen table and read the first message. Then the second. Then the third. Heather had written like a concerned sister, soft and careful, pretending to speak for me because I was supposedly too broken to speak for myself. She told Carol I cried at night over bills I couldn't pay. She said Matthew's final expenses were worse than expected. She claimed I was skipping meals to keep the mortgage current. One message said, "Please don't tell her I told you. She'll be humiliated, and I'm afraid it will send her into a spiral." That was the part that made my hands shake. She knew exactly how to make me sound. Not dramatic. Not helpless. Just broken enough. Carol and George had sent money to Heather for 7 months. A few hundred here. 1,000 there. Then bigger transfers when Heather claimed the house was close to default. The total was just under $18,000. I stared at that number until my eyes hurt. $18,000 from 2 grieving parents who believed they were secretly helping their dead son's wife survive. I drove to Heather's house that evening. I didn't call first. I didn't plan a speech. I just got in the car with my phone on the passenger seat and the messages open like evidence from someone else's nightmare. Heather answered the door smiling, then stopped when she saw my face. I asked, "Did you take money from Carol and George?" Her mouth opened a little. That was enough. She stepped back and said, "Can we not do this on the porch?" I followed her into the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was the new backsplash. I know that sounds petty, but grief makes objects too sharp sometimes. New tile. New coffee machine. A purse on the counter with tags still attached. A few months earlier, Heather had told me she and Brian had finally caught a break. I remembered being happy for her. Now I knew where the break came from. I put my phone on the table and asked again. She started crying immediately, but it wasn't guilt. It was panic. She told me I didn't understand how hard things had been for her. Bills were piling up. Brian had less work for a while. She had helped me for months, and nobody asked how she was doing. Then her voice turned bitter. Carol and George had money, she said. And you didn't even need it. I asked her if she understood what she had done. That was when she said the line I still hear in my head. It's not like Matthew can use it. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I looked at her kitchen, at all those shiny little signs of relief she had bought with someone else's grief, and I felt something inside me go very still. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet. "Don't ever say his name like that again." She wiped her face and tried to soften. She said she didn't mean it that way. She was overwhelmed. She planned to pay it back. It had gotten out of control. She kept trying to make it sound like a misunderstanding that had simply gone too far. I asked if Brian knew. Her face answered before she did. She said, "He knows we were struggling." That's not what I asked. She lowered her voice and told me not to bring him into it. I almost laughed because she had brought everyone into it. Me, Matthew, his parents, the grief we were all barely surviving. Brian was apparently the one person she wanted protected. I told her she had one chance to tell Carol and George the truth and give them a repayment plan in writing. She stared at me like I had betrayed her. "You want to treat me like a criminal?" I said, "You used my dead husband's parents like an ATM." Her face hardened. She told me to stop making it uglier than it was. That was when I knew she wasn't sorry. She was scared, embarrassed, and angry that I had found out. But sorry? No, not yet. I left before Brian came home. That night, I called my mom. Maybe some childish part of me still thought mothers knew how to fix sisters. My mom cried and said Heather had made a terrible mistake. My dad got on the phone and asked if I was sure about the amount. When I told him I had the messages and transfer dates, he went quiet. Then he said, "This needs to be handled privately." I asked why. "Because once you make this official, you can't undo it." I told him Heather couldn't undo what she did either. My mom begged me not to destroy the family. She said Heather had been under pressure. She said Brian probably had no idea. She said Carol and George were already grieving, and a legal fight would only hurt them more. That last part got to me because I had been thinking the same thing. For a week, I did nothing. I printed the messages, put them in a folder, then hid the folder in a drawer because looking at it made me sick. I thought about letting Heather pay it back quietly. I thought about how tired Carol sounded on the phone. I thought about George standing in my hallway, realizing he had accidentally told me the truth. Part of me wanted to bury it because enough people had already been hurt. But every time I imagined staying quiet, I saw Heather deciding what everyone deserved to know. Heather deciding my grief was useful. Heather deciding Matthew's name was something she could borrow when her bills got uncomfortable. By the end of that week, I knew silence would make me part of the lie. I invited everyone to my house on a Saturday afternoon. Carol, George, my parents, Heather, and Brian. I told Heather ahead of time that she could tell the truth herself. If she did, I would let Carol and George decide what they wanted next. Heather arrived with swollen eyes and a hard face. Brian looked confused. My parents looked like they were walking into a disaster they already wanted to forgive. Carol sat on the edge of my couch. George stood near the window with his arms crossed. He didn't look at Heather. I asked Heather to talk. She started with a shaky apology, but within seconds she was explaining. She said she had borrowed money during a crisis. She said helping me after Matthew died had taken a toll. She said Carol and George wanted to help, and she accepted because she thought Matthew would have wanted it. Brian turned to her. What money? Heather closed her eyes. That was when I opened the folder. I didn't yell. I just read enough to make the truth impossible to twist. The message where she said I was behind on the house. The one where she claimed I was crying over medical bills. The one where she warned Carol not to tell me because I was too fragile. Carol covered her mouth and walked out of the room. I heard her crying in the hallway. George stayed by the window, but his face changed in a way I wish I could forget. He looked embarrassed before he looked angry, like he was ashamed of being kind enough to believe her. Brian stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. He asked Heather if the kitchen renovation came from that money. She didn't answer. My mom whispered Heather's name, and Heather snapped. She said everyone was acting like she was a monster. She said nobody cared that she had been drowning too. She said I got the insurance money, the house, and all the sympathy, while she got months of being my unpaid support system. I looked at her and said, you could have asked for help. She said, you wouldn't have given it. Maybe she was right. I wouldn't have given her money from Matthew's parents. I wouldn't have let her turn their grief into a payment plan. My dad tried to calm everyone down. He said there was still a private way to fix this. A written agreement. Monthly payments. No police. No lawyers. He talked like this was a family loan that had gotten messy. George finally spoke. He looked at Heather and said, you made us think our son's wife was starving. Heather started crying again. This time, she didn't argue. Carol came back into the room, pale and shaking. She looked at me and apologized. That broke me more than anything else. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She and George had done something kind. Heather was the one who twisted it. Heather tried to move toward Carol, but Brian stepped between them without saying a word. That was the moment Heather seemed to understand the room had changed. The truth was no longer private. It was sitting there with all of us, ugly and undeniable. After everyone left, I sat on the living room floor with the folder beside me. The house felt the way it had after the funeral, too quiet and too full at the same time. The next Monday, I filed a police report. I did not do it because I wanted Heather dragged away. I did it because Carol and George needed an official record, and because Heather had already shown me that private promises meant nothing. She paid back a small amount after the meeting, then stopped responding about the rest. Brian moved out 2 weeks later. He called me once, not to defend her, just to ask for copies of everything. His voice sounded empty. My parents were furious with me. My mom said I had chosen punishment over healing. My dad said the report would ruin Heather's future and make repayment harder. I asked him what part of Heather's future mattered more than the people she had already broken. He didn't answer. Carol and George met with an attorney. They haven't pushed as hard as they could, and I understand why. Grief makes even justice exhausting. Some days Carol wants accountability. Other days she says she can't stand hearing Heather's name. Heather still sends messages through relatives. She says she wants to apologize when I'm ready to stop punishing her. She says I turned everyone against her. She says I never cared that she was struggling, only that she got caught. Maybe she was struggling. I've thought about that more than people probably expect. I know bills can pile up until shame starts making decisions for you. I know being near someone else's grief can feel invisible and heavy. But she had choices. She could have asked my parents. She could have asked me. She could have told Carol and George the truth. Instead, she studied my pain closely enough to imitate it. She knew which details would scare them. She knew Carol worried I wasn't eating. She knew George felt helpless because he couldn't fix death with a toolbox. She used all of it. That is the part one can't forgive yet. The money matters, but it is not just the money. It is Matthew's name in those messages. It is Carol whispering that she was glad the money helped. It is George realizing he had been tricked into thinking he was protecting the woman his son loved. It is Heather standing in her kitchen, surrounded by things paid for with grief, acting like I was cruel for noticing. People keep asking what Matthew would have wanted. I hate that question. Matthew is generous, but he was not stupid. He would have helped Heather if she had asked honestly. He would not have wanted his parents manipulated while they were barely surviving his death. I still miss him in ordinary ways that feel almost embarrassing. I miss hearing his keys hit the bowl by the door. I miss complaining about bills with him. I miss the way he would say, "Okay, start from the beginning," whenever family drama got messy. Sometimes I still catch myself wanting to call him and tell him what happened. Then I remember he is the reason it happened at all, not because he did anything wrong, but because the people left behind loved him enough to be vulnerable. Carol still calls every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about groceries and weather. Sometimes we just sit there quietly. A few weeks ago, she told me she was afraid I would pull away because of what Heather did. I told her, "You're still my family." She cried so hard she had to hang up. My mom wants everyone to try to be normal again. I don't know what normal means after your sister uses your dead husband as a password to unlock other people's bank accounts. I don't know how to sit across from Heather and pretend she didn't make grieving parents pay for her lies. I don't feel victorious. I thought exposing her would feel like revenge, but it mostly feels like cleaning up a mess I never made. Heather is angry. My parents are disappointed in me. Brian's marriage is probably over. Carol and George are grieving Matthew and the version of my family they thought they knew. But the truth is out now. It is not hiding in private transfers and fake concern anymore. It is not sitting in my chest alone. I don't regret opening that folder in front of everyone. I regret that there had to be a folder at all. So I need to ask, because my family keeps saying I let grief turn me cold, was I wrong for exposing my sister and filing a report instead of letting her quietly promise to pay it back?